I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Rebecca Harding, who is one of our editorial board members. Rebecca, welcome.
Hi, how are you doing?
What hat are you wearing here today at ITFA?
So I've been talking about the societal, social and security return on investment work that I've been doing for ITFA over the last 2 or 3 years, but particularly focusing on social return on investment and developing a metric so that we can actually start looking at the impact of deals rather than just the compliance aspects of ESG, which is very interesting.
Well, I was about to say, are you telling me you've just rebranded ESG because we don't talk about that word anymore?
It's exactly that. So it's actually, there's been some really interesting stuff here going on actually, and the first panel that I attended this morning was talking very much along the lines of, well, we need to make anything that we're doing that looks like it's implementing change or innovating relevant, easy to implement and cost effective. And so the problem with ESG is it's become this big compliance burden for absolutely everybody, and then the compliance criteria are shifting slightly and the US is changing its attitudes towards E, and therefore what we need to start thinking about is how we still measure impact, because one of the other things that came out very loud and clear from Saratan Gupta this morning was we need to think about people and purpose. So I think that's incredibly important, and so measuring impact and looking at how we measure the social, the societal and most importantly of all the security impacts of how we are working as bankers and in trade finance, I think is incredibly important.
And it's profitable, right? Because I think you've coined yet another abbreviation, SROI.
Yes.
Tell me more.
Well, SROI has been around for a long time. It's not a new thing. I wish it was, but economists tend to package stuff up in a new way and look as though they're being original, but they're actually telling you stuff that's been around for a long time. So SROI was the social return on investment. Now it was used, and a lot of people don't know this about me, but I spent a lot of time studying social enterprise when I was working with governments and things like that. We looked at social enterprise and the impact that they have. So social return on investment is what you get back in terms of social returns, and we can measure those economically against a pound invested or a dollar invested. And this is doing exactly the same thing for trade finance and trade finance transactions. It's looking at the broader societal impact, so jobs created, the economic spillover effects, the effects that it's having on employment or for emerging markets going up the value chain, the global value chain. So it's actually an extremely good way of quantifying these things so that we can actually then talk to the regulators and say, you can treat our liquidity, you can treat our trade finance transactions in a way because we're actually measuring the impact that we have.
So what is working then in terms of SROI? What are the what's working?
So I think what's working, and this segues nicely into some of the work that I've been doing more recently as well. One of the things that's really working is the fact that the world is shifting. The world is shifting. It's turning into far more nationalistic. We're beginning to talk more about security frameworks, particularly in NATO countries and amongst our allies. The whole system of how we do business is in the process of changing. And you could say, well, that's just creative destruction of capitalism and it always happens and it goes in long waves. And unfortunately, at the end of any of those long waves, there's often a war. And so that's what we're talking about, preparedness. Now, if we can start looking and developing those types of frameworks that allow us to watch what's going on and be prepared, then the chances are that we will avoid big crises. So SROI helps us to do that because we can start to look in terms of societal returns at defence expenditure and defence transactions in the same way that we look at, for example, medical equipment or green transition or something like that.
Rebecca, you talked about from perma crises to what's going on now. I can't remember how many years ago, but you often talked about the weaponization of trade and trade banks essentially being the foot soldiers of government implementing some of these nationalistic policies. I've just got your new book, The World at Economic War. Rebecca, is the world at economic war?
The world is at economic war, and I don't think we should be couching that up in nice terms. I think if you look at what's going on, everything is changing. Now, why is that a war? It's actually because the superpowers, China and America, have both declared war effectively on the economic system. They've both said it isn't working for them, and they've set themselves against each other, China and the United States, to try and find the new way of developing an international rules-based order that is appropriate to what they want on their terms. So that nationalism has actually turned into something which is threatening the entire economic order of the last 80 years. Now that puts Europe in a very, very, very difficult position, because Europe is set up on the basis of institutions that were put there to prevent war within Europe, between those nations. And so its institutions are set up for peacetime, and they're not flexible enough to adapt to the very rapidly changing environment that we're in at the moment. Call it trade and tariffs, call it climate crises, call it technological change, whatever you want to call this. It's not what it was 5-10 years ago. All the writing was on the wall when I wrote the weaponisation of trade. And sadly, somebody said to me a little while ago, it might even have been you, Deepesh, how many times have you given your I told you so speech? And it's not an I told you so speech, but I did say that this was the likely end of where we were going to get to, collapse of global institutions, and that's what's happening.
And in your book, you talk about the fact that there might not be a return to the old normal, and actually the way that we can navigate the current situation is by looking at what normal does look like. So can you give us a couple of nuggets? How can institutions navigate what they're seeing in the world? How can we try and return to, something that we can cope with?
Yeah, so there's no normal to return to. So change is endemic, it always has been, and this concept of normal actually is just stability, right? I think we can say we would love to have some certainty, and the big categorisation of what we've got at the moment is massive uncertainty, and that's been very clear here at the ITFA event. It was clear yesterday at the GTR event as well. All of these things are just uncertain. The climate of uncertainty for business and banks is huge. So how do we go about managing all of that? Well, some of it is actually about anticipating, preparing for the worst and hoping for the best. In the book, I've advocated for economic wargaming, for example, which is fun. It puts people outside of their comfort zones, because you have to show them how a trade war is then going to lead through to something bigger. And people don't like thinking about that. So a lot of this is pushing people to the edge of their comfort zone, because we've been so safe for the last 50 years. So I think it's about preparedness, measuring impact, watching what's going on in the environment, and developing that type of organisational flexibility that means that you can respond to changes as they happen, because you're prepared with your institutional frameworks. And it's that institutional framework that gives you the economic security that I'm also promoting in the book.
Thank you very much. Preparedness is key. That was Rebecca Harding here at ITFA's annual Trade and Forfaiting Conference here in Singapore. Rebecca is our editorial board member at Treasury Payments. Also, very shortly releasing her new book, The World is at Economic War. Rebecca, thank you.
Thank you.